Max Hall, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell from the Hawthorn Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you are well. There are now just 3 and a bit weeks left to go in your fantasy footy season. And when I mean weeks, I mean rounds, because it's probably about 10 days left in the year to go with this Fantasy Football Festival version 2 continuing on. We are recording this on a Friday afternoon, and maybe that's when you're listening to it as well. The next round of fantasy footy gets underway on your Saturday. It is not much of a gap between it because it is going to end tonight with Brisbane and Collingwood. Lockout lifts a couple of hours later. And then tomorrow evening, Saturday evening, is when we get locked back out again with the commencement of the round, meaning for AFL fantasy coaches, your Pies and Tigers that play this round, you'll get their average. Everyone else is going to be just dead weight in your team. And I suppose, Kane, let's talk about AFL fantasy while we're there. They've already had one league of finals, or week of finals in AFL fantasy. The other formats we're going to talk about in just a second. But it's another interesting week of strategy, isn't it? Are there any Tigers or Pies that caught your eye? And again, we haven't seen Collingwood play tonight just yet, that could be trade targets that we look at in AFL fantasy this week?
I think MJ's probably going to look elsewhere. I think a lot of people were looking at Basher Hooley to come with a big score against the Dockers. Didn't work out like that. I think Jaden Short's been a guy that a lot of people got, and they'd be really happy with what he's done across the formats. Even with Basher returning to the side, he's pretty much just been a constant premium back there in defence. Clearly, Dusty was underwhelming by his lofty standards, but again, are you really too concerned in an AFL fantasy scoring format? His average is still pretty solid.
Yeah, 73 in that format.
Collingwood again, Grundy, you're happy with that. We haven't seen him play yet, but he's already up above 90 in that format, which for some people is, already captaincy type of material. And, Taylor Adams is another one that people would be sort of happy to hold. Not too many guys, maybe if Max Lynch comes out tonight and has an absolute huge one, and we know that we can take that score going into next week, maybe he's the type of guy. But in all honesty, it seems unlikely, doesn't it, with Grundy and Cox in the team? What do we really expect from a guy in the debut?
I suppose, Rids, and maybe I'll ask you, it could be that potential because generating cash in all formats of the year is a little bit tricky to navigate. And again, purely staying in the AFL fantasy format focus. For those that own Draper, it could be that option, Rids, I suppose, of make yourself that quick $150,000, hoping you're not going to have to need that bench cover because you're going to have Grundy's more than likely 90-plus score in the kitty. Is that the type of trade we should be looking to move?
I think that's actually perfect. You get a Max Lynch, coming in, pretty much a bottom price type of player. If you got Draper at R3, bang, there's 200K straight away for you. The reality, though, is I think Kane summed it up well. There's not a hell of a lot to do there with the teams that are on the buys there this week. So there is very, very easy. Thompson Dow was disappointing last game. So, he's not even an option for a bench cover type scenario because he's just not averaging enough. So, yeah, it's really, really picks itself this week, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. But when we do move across to the other formats, and maybe it's more SuperCoach. He's very, very popular, Dustin Martin, across all the formats. But he certainly hasn't had the most dominant fantasy football year that owners might have become accustomed to Dusty delivering. A few weeks ago, Kane, on the podcast, you said there was a potential move that coaches could have considered. It's more than probably a few weeks ago now, that at a premium price, Dusty, after that season high score kind of was looking to roll out, coaches could have moved him on, picked up some value, and then reallocated that cash. Is that still a trade owners could be looking to move this week in DreamTeam and SuperCoach, moving on a Dustin Martin to a Toby Green, who had a pretty good week last week as an example type? Is that the type of move we should be looking for in either of these two more limited trade formats?
I think that time's gone, MJ, unfortunately, for those coaches. The price back then was perfect because he had that absolute monster, especially in SuperCoach where it was 180 plus and it was just about to roll out. And the reason I was encouraging that was not so much, Dusty having a poor, game. I wouldn't predicted what he did against Freo, but with just how deep Richmond is and how well they do at managing their players, especially in this back half of the season, there was a big chance there to take your cash and get some decent scoring. And there was some options at that time that were quite juicy as well. I think if you move Dusty on now, you might bring on 20 to 30 points because as Rids alluded to, no one's going to really be struggling to field a full side. And what I mean by that is probably even 20 players. So if you're up trading a Dusty in a DT format and you bring in a Toby Green, maybe that 70 pushes out a 40 or 50 from one of your rookies elsewhere. And really, is 20 points enough to burn a trade? And even if the player you bring in outscores Dusty by 50 over the remaining 2 rounds after that, we're only talking 70 points.
Yeah.
And again, clearly, if you nail the player and, that person goes absolutely huge and, things go your way, maybe you can net enough points for it to be worth it. But I just don't have the confidence in finding someone from a Dusty that I have that, view of.
Yeah.
I think there's another thing as well there, MJ.
Yeah.
Dusty is playing the Adelaide Crows in a grand final.
Now,
in a SuperCoach format, he's the type of guy that could win you a grand final with a good performance.
Yeah, it's true. Look, Ben Keys is going to probably be, if anyone from the Crows midfield is going to be the one to try to go with him. But let's be fair. Dusty's near impossible to stop for the best of defensive midfielders like your De Boers. I think to trade out any Tigers that you've got, knowing that they've got Adelaide in that final round of the year, whether your focus is leagues or rankings, I feel like you're just trying to get a bit too cute with it.
So I also think that Dusty's going to play a lot of time up forward. Richmond's likely to dominate that game. He's potentially going to kick 4 or 5 goals in that matchup.
Yeah, throw a couple of score involvements for SuperCoach and you're looking at a 130-plus score very easily.
Very, very easily. If not, if he goes absolutely nuts like we've seen previously, he could be 170, 180. Who knows?
Well, and these are the kind of moves that we do need to consider the fixture matchups while we look at it. As we're heading to round 16 with round 15 still underway, are there any matchups that really stand out to you? Because coaches, regardless of whether you've only got a handful of trades left in Dream Team or SuperCoach, or you're an AFL fantasy coach, you've got those 3 trades a week, use it or lose. Is there any of these matchups, as I'll walk through the 8 games we've got, that just jump out to either of you of that's a prime matchup and there's a really strong trade target that we're going to get an instant reward? We've got North Melbourne and Port Adelaide, St Kilda taking on the Hawks, Geelong versus the Bombers, the Dogs taking on the Eagles, the Demons and the Dockers, then the final 3 games of the round, the Crows taking on the Giants, the Swans and the Blues, and Brisbane and the Gold Coast Suns at the Gabba. Any matchups there that you're like, straight away, this is what you've got to take a note on, Kane, for you?
Well, the one that jumps out straight off the top, MJ, is Luke McDonald versus Port. The amount of ball that's going to be in that North Melbourne back half takes the kick-outs. We know, and I don't know if it is sustainable, which is probably a chat for another podcast, but the way North Melbourne are playing at the moment and the amount of points they're conceding and his role back in that side, like, as we mentioned a few weeks ago, he'd reeled off 3 150-plus scores in the old Dream Team scoring ways in a 5-week period. Like, his ceiling is just out of control. On the flip side, you wouldn't mind, Travis Boak. The season he's putting together, just really solid. The midfield unit for North is super, super depleted. And from there, there's a lot of matchups that you'd have to fancy. Again, Jack Steele versus Hawthorn. There's no tagging going on at Hawthorn. You looked what the midfield did. Matt Crouch in particular against Hawthorn just went wherever he wanted to. Again, Geelong and Essendon, you wouldn't probably feel super great, not from a tag perspective for a merit maybe, but Geelong's restrictiveness as a whole.
Just
on the flip side, Essendon's now lost McGrath as well, and they just sort of let everyone have free reign. So I'm looking down and I can sort of fancy any of the matchups. The one that might be tricky, although they do have a penchant for pulling off these sort of upsets, is the Bulldogs versus West Coast.
Yeah.
Again, that seems like a tough game on paper. West Coast have had a really tough fixture in terms of the amount of games in a really short period of time. Luke Shuey out of that engine room. Tim Kelly's been off the boil by what he was, in the middle part of the season when he was really humming. So to pick a McRae would probably be tough in that game. And there's always that threat that maybe they'll throw a Hutchings in. But yeah, I'm seeing a lot of games where, you feel really confident. We haven't even got to, Melbourne, who let up points for fun in the midfield against Freo, and obviously the one that jumps out to everyone is the Giants taking on the Crows.
Yeah, it's true. What about for you, Rids? Is there anything that jumps out for you?
Well, I reckon there's going to be a real discussion going around the place about which Adelaide Crow to jump on after their big week last week. And I reckon that's fraught with danger this week against GWS.
Yeah, I agree. Tell me why that is, because you're right. People do overreact or try to overcorrect based on a team or a couple of players within a team having one standout week.
So I think there was question marks around who a Matt de Boer would go to, prior to last week. I actually think there's a Matt Crouch has almost played himself into a tag now.
100%.
Because he's had a 30-subject possession game last week. They've had a win, and so on and so forth. Sloane's not playing well enough. Laird sort of played more accountable in the midfield. He seemed to match up against Tom Mitchell. I just think he's played himself into a tag there because there's just no one else really there. And then on top of that, people are going to go jump in Grundy down to, let's say, an O'Brien, for the Hawks. But really, the trade to make was last week was going to an O'Brien.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering whether that's might bite a few people. They go and do that, and then they get caught out by a Grundy who can actually hurt you bad after a rest. So it's just one of those delicate games, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating round for us to kind of look at. That is for sure. Kane.
I think Reed's makes a great point with Crouch just going forward. Is in the past, he's that sort of, ball winner, gets a lot of the 1-2s playing in tight, but he's actually taking the game on and getting more involved. And I know it's easy to generate score involvements when you finally play in the team's first win of the year.
Yeah.
But I thought some of the stats that they were showing in that game, Matt Crouch in the past month is the number one pressure player in the competition.
Yeah.
And that's been the criticism on him is that defensive side of his game is lacking. But again, we saw it 14 tackles in the game against Geelong. And as Reed said, he's actually becoming a damaging player that would actually attract a tag. It's not going to go to Brad in his, he just returned from injury.
Yeah.
Sloane's, it's not his best Sloane. We know how good of a player he is. And the way Laird and Smith float around, it's not really the type of player that, de Boer's really attracted to going with. He loves that inside mid matchup where he can just, hang on to you all game, honestly. The only saving grace may be that the Giants, think they can just play their natural game and beat them. But I think after the scare they had against Carlton last night,
correct,
they definitely would have to start with him having a defensive role. And maybe if they get a 5-6 plus goal league, de Boer gets freed up. But he's just so good at that job that why would you not use him?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. We do find ourselves at an interesting junction in the season, and we'll talk about this split of focus in a moment regarding whether you're going for your leagues or whether you're going for overall rankings, because certainly that does play an impact on the type of trade moves you should be looking at. But across the formats, there's been some underwhelming scores over the past couple of weeks from some really highly touted players. Stephen Cornelio is probably the one that's getting the most knocks, might be not even the fair word, but probably getting the most attention from fantasy coaches that might feel like they've got a little bit of room to wiggle with their trades. Is it the type of week? I know he comes up against Adelaide. We all thought the Hawks should dominate the Crows midfield. It wasn't the case for just this one game. But is someone like a Stephen Cornelio, Doherty's not certainly delivered the big scores that we'd hoped. We've already talked a little bit about Dusty. If you find yourself with this underperforming premium, maybe Kane, I'll throw it to you first. Is that too much of a luxury trade, given for most coaches, they're only just now getting to that completed team?
I think it is. It smells way too much, MJ, to me. We cast our minds back a month when Bailey Smith was this type of player that everyone wanted out of their team. And what did he have that week? He had a match up against the Crows, and albeit they are improved from that Bulldogs game, that was one of their most disappointing games of the year for the Crows. But he is the captain. I haven't seen any injury per se in the game or heard anything about him struggling with injury. He's playing more midfield minutes than he has for a lot of the season when he was stationed forward. I think he just had a really bad game. He just had a really bad game. And he's had a disappointing season. And again, we got him at a discount. We've got to remember, he had a horrible injury against Richmond that ended his day early on 0 points.
Yeah.
We got some discount there, but he hasn't returned to those 110 heights of previous years. I think that's a really luxury trade to be making. And I'd be really curious as to who those coaches would be targeting that move on at Cornelio. I'd be fascinated to see who they have so much confidence in at the value, to pull that type of move off. I think there'd be someone else in my team. Again, on the flip side, if you look at a Matt Crouch, if he's your target and you're rolling into a De Boer,
oh boy,
again, like you're thinking about what De Boer's got coming home. If I'm bringing in anyone, I'm not bringing in Jack Steele. He's got him in the last round.
Yep.
I'm going to find it hard to bring in a Clayton Oliver.
Yeah.
So I'd just be really curious to see where are you going to find what I think has to be 100-point gain at this point of the season, almost with, we know the carnage that can happen in the remaining few rounds. I'd just be curious what your trade target is, because I think you've got to find someone better than Cornelio, as disappointing as he's been.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair.
And MJ, just with Matt Crouch as well, let's not forget he's also got Carlton directly after the GWS, who absolutely are they're causing issues with scoring points against them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you got that friendly matchup in the grand final. I'm with a little bit with Kane here. You can do a sideways trade going into the last match if you make the grand final.
Sure.
But you've got to make the grand final first. And doing that sideways trade now with GWS and Carlton as your next two, I'm not feeling really confident about that.
No, they're running with two of the best accountable defensive midfielders. Whether you want to choose the term tagger or not, I really couldn't give two stuffs about. But make no mistakes about it, Curno's role has redefined back over this past 5 or 6 weeks, where he's now keeping an eye on that. So if you want to know who he's got coming up over the final 3 rounds of the year, Sydney, so probably Luke Parker. JPK is always a candidate, but probably Luke Parker, you would presume. Then it is that Matt Crouch likely update. And then the final round, maybe some slight cause for concern here, Kane. Maybe some for coaches, but a Lockie Neal matchup in the final round. Even some tonight are a little bit hesitant to want to put the captaincy on Lockie Neal, given there's a likely Greenwood tag that could come from. So I've just, double negated myself with that comment. Look at me learning to speak for a living, could and likely, but that might be some cause for concern for some that might want to look to still try to get Neal into their team.
Yeah, well, that's always the risk, isn't it? Again, if you've got someone who can really clamp someone down, like a De Boer, like a Curnow, we're talking about, well, Neal's got 4 games because we haven't seen him play tonight yet. But if you get that one bad score, if you get that 50 with 3 games to go, it's really hard to be in the top handful of players. And on the flip side, you can find guys that just absolutely smack it out of the park. Again, if someone brought Blake Acres in on the weekend and you got that 108 in there now, he only needs to go in the 60s to already make that a great pick. Like, you've done your dash. Yeah. So I think that's where people become, you can take those big swings. And what Rid said is so important for league coaches is if you keep your powder dry enough, you can avoid those type of matchups where those stinkers are. And often in grand finals in leagues, it's more about avoiding the stinker than it is trying to find the massive 150-plus score. And again, if you are a person with Jack Steele in a league final and you've got to trade up your sleeve, you can take your pick at a really juicy matchup, look at the form, see what the team sheets are delivering and move a Steele on. And maybe you do get 60, 70 points there in the most important game of the year because, again, you've got to differentiate. What are you trying to achieve? Obviously, overall points, you take any points you can get. But I'd rather have, if I'm going for league, a 60-point better game in the grand final than I would an extra 100 points over the last 3 weeks. Yeah, so I think that's where you've really got to establish what your focus is. And it is really hard because we saw people this week, MJ, and we spoke about it on the last podcast, was how do you trade in this period? Because if you're league focused in round 15, you almost just had to keep your powder dry, not worry, prepare yourself. We spoke about just trading the injured guys that won't be there, but give yourself the most information because this condensed fixture's doing all sorts of things to player management. Yeah. And as the one we keep speaking about, it's not the restings in terms of missing the game. In-game. It's the in-game rest. Nick Natanui was the one on the weekend in SuperCoach. So a lot of coaches were, really hurt by it. It looked like a sensational matchup. Yeah. But it just didn't pan out that way.
Yeah, it's really true. And so, Rids, for someone that is got a league focus, for AFL fantasy coaches, you're already either about to or at time of listening have just completed your first week of finals. So you've either just got knocked out with the elimination or it's the qualifying finals. For every other format, your league finals start this week. Is it, Rids, just a simple case of depending on the style of final you're playing for, whether you're qualifying or eliminating, does that then dictate the style of aggression or trade you should be going for?
I really do think it does depend on that. Now, but again, I just want to highlight something else. This just shows how good a season AFL Fantasy have had with their decision-making, is there's been no bye before the first final. They've actually got that momentum building. They've got people already actively invested in those finals. Coming off the other formats, you've had this bye for round 15.
Yeah.
So some people may or may not be interested coming off what are we looking at, 12 to 1,500 score in Dream Team? I mean, that doesn't really build the momentum going into the final. So a lot of people might actually start making these trades, trying to catch up points and actually hurt their league focus moving forward. So, but this week coming up, okay, it's all dependent now. So you might be lucky enough to be sitting in a prelim final and just ready to go in round 17, or you might be actually going into a cutthroat. And so you have to make a trade now, as I said before, to actually make the grand final. This might be a league of your mates where you get bragging rights for the better part of the next 6 months. You want to be using this time to maximize those points. And you have to pull the trigger. Any gut feel on this, you have to pull the trigger. Unfortunately, we got guys playing 3-4 games in a matter of 10, 15 days. It's just not conducive to having massive scoring, but no regrets here. You have to have a crack, you know?
I agree. And look, these condensed fixtures, we're going to keep seeing teams that are in a genuine finals contention that have a luxury to do so. We are going to see in-game restings, which you've alluded to, Kane, but we are just going to see flat-out management of players and our superstars. And so we're going to need to keep some of these powder dried or trades up our sleeve, because I would not be shocked at all if in round 17 or 18, a Patrick Dangerfield type. Now, he's just an example. I'm not saying he's going to get it. But a star of their team that they want cherry ripe for finals, barring a disaster, they're top 4 bound. So they're very secure in that, as opposed to a GWS who are fighting for survival. So it's different horses for courses. But Kane, it wouldn't shock me at all to see a Port Adelaide rest a Boak at some point in this back half of this final 3 games, or the Dangerfields. You know, if Brisbane, it wouldn't even shock me if Lachie Neale got a week off here or there. Like, these players don't care, and clubs don't care about fantasy footy. If their final spot is secure in the ladder, there's stuff that we want you ripe and ready.
Well, MJ, that's one fact that I think is, a lot of thought, obviously. But the other one that always jumps to my mind now is it's Friday. We're about to end round 15.
Yeah.
In a week and a half, we'll have ended round 17.
Yeah.
This is how close the fixture is. You cop a knock. Josh Kelly, with the concussion, he was automatically ruled out for round 15.
Yeah.
Again, we haven't even heard if he's going to be right for round 16 because Port Adelaide, they had a bye between round 14 and 16. They had 15 bye. They're playing off a 7-day break.
Yeah.
North Melbourne had the bye. They're playing off a 6-day break.
Yeah.
You cop a corky that's bad and doesn't pull up well.
It's a normal week.
We haven't even put into it. You're missing a game. You're missing a game and a half. You haven't even factored in, maybe let's put another player out on the field that we haven't seen because they're not 100%. Yeah. And then we get into all the finals teams and managing that. And obviously that's sort of what West Coast had to deal with Shuey, is they're pushing for this top 4 finish, push him too hard and the hamstrings have gone again.
Yeah.
So again, all these factors, we've spoken about it. Luck's never been at a higher point. It's never been more important to have luck on your side, but you do give yourself a really good chance, especially in leagues, because if you keep those trades, and as Ridge mentioned, if you've won your prelim and you've got this next week off as well, and you can go in with, trades up your sleeve, that's where you get those massive swings and give yourself the best chance. But this fixture, players haven't played like this since their junior days when they were playing national championships with, 3 games in 10 days. At AFL level, people are blowing up off a 5-day break.
Yeah,
Like we're
normally.
talking about, incredible. And obviously the game times come down, but as we've talked about in the past, the best players are still getting a really good, healthy dose of minutes.
Of game time.
Time on ground. So it's a crazy period, MJ, where this carnage can happen. It can probably happen quick. I think it does help. There's a bye between round 18 and the finals.
True.
That obviously helps a little bit. But as I said, you get one bad knock and it's a corky and you can't recover in time.
Yeah.
Especially with the flying same day travel as well. For a lot of injuries, that's just a no-go. So, again, keeping a trade up your sleeve will always be handy. Again, there will always be a season where there is no carnage and we sit on these trades
and we
wish we acted earlier, but you just never know, do you?
It's very, very true. Go Reds.
And going into this period of time, who would have predicted that Nick Natanui would have played week after week after week after week?
So true.
Who would have predicted that a lot of these guys actually would have kept going and going and going? Yet we just don't know what's going to happen, do we? So
it's just best guess.
The reality is anyone could just, you could bump your finger in the car door on the way to the train and you could be done for a week here.
Yeah.
There's no reason. And if you're cemented in that top 4 position, in the ladder, so there's no, why risk it? Why? You might as well give the player an extra week and a half off to actually get ripe for the first final that comes in. So we're going to be really in a bit of pain over the next couple of weeks, I feel.
And the reverse could even happen for us as teams start to find themselves out of finals contention. The team and the player that immediately comes to mind for me is a Max Gawn from Melbourne. Unfortunately for them, they've put themselves under the acid to really make the finals. There is absolutely a world where their big captain, who's certainly battled through the year with some injuries, if that finals position's gone, why risk a guy that's clearly not quite at his best in terms of peak fitness? And I think, Kane, that's the other side of it too, isn't it? As clubs fall out of contention, they go, let's put our stars away for another time.
Yeah, well, especially one that at one point had 3 injuries at the same time in his shoulder, back, and the knee. So for me, he's the ultimate risk-reward player in the run home.
Yeah.
Because there is no one at the moment, and again, Neil is certainly up there because he's having a phenomenal season, but I feel like a lot of people have him. If you're in this point of the season, you're playing, there's very few people that don't have him. The tricky part with Gawn was, again, like what we spoke about 6 weeks ago, he was battling injury. He was at peak price and he was about to miss games. He'd been confirmed to miss a game. When we spoke about, moving him on to a Nick Nat or a Goldstein or something like that as he recovered. The time away, they were really patient, and there was some coaches that were patient, using an Oscar McInerney, using a Sam Draper.
Yeah.
And now they've got this weapon in their team that's a 100 Dream Team type of player and a 150 SuperCoach type of player. And they're almost a unique.
Yeah.
And coaches now are in the position where they're realizing it's near impossible to take a Sam Draper up to a Max Gawn unless you planned your whole week around it. You're talking about taking a premium down to a sub-premium, a premium down to a sub-premium.
Yeah.
And you got to just find every penny you can get, because we're talking about, $350K in SuperCoach to get this guy in.
Yeah.
But again, in the run home, he is a unique for some people, and you put the captaincy on that, and we've shown his potential. It's out of this world, and it can win you league matchups and fire you up the overall ranks. As you mentioned, though, the flip side is if Melbourne, are mathematically out of the race.
Yeah.
Do you just put his season on hold?
Because he has got probably, along with O'Brien, the best ruck run. It's Fremantle, it's GWS, and then it's Essendon. If you get
that's extraordinary, isn't it, MJ?
That is huge.
Because we're talking about a guy that is having the greatest SuperCoach season we've ever seen in terms of average. Yeah. And that is of all time. And we know that in SuperCoach, this condensed fixture has made this more possible. I don't think we can compare it to the Ablett seasons of the past, or even that Jonathan Brown famous stretch where he was, unbelievable. It's clearly a different game, especially in that format with the way points have been allocated.
Totally.
But we have to respect that he can do that. And like you mentioned, that is one of the all-time ruck runs.
Yeah.
That is unbelievable. It's almost how you draw it up. You probably put a Bulldogs in there.
Yeah.
But other than that, we've got this guy that's delivered, for a stretch. He was a 155 guy for 2 months.
Yeah.
And if this is a guy you don't have, I can see where people go, I'm tossing up between the Lockie Neal, or even if we drop down a category below that, I'm tossing up between the Zach Merritts or the Dylan Shields in that lower brand. I'm just going to go down to a JPK.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to, at least I know I can get the Draper to Gawn.
Yeah.
You know? And that's where we find, I think, people are taking these punts.
Yep.
And yeah, if you've got trades, I think he is the guy to get if you can. Just don't be afraid that you might have to use another one in a week and a half to replace him.
Yeah, that's
the big thing about that is, what about next year? How do you start Max Gawn in SuperCoach next year at that likely price tag?
It's so difficult. Next year, there's two big question marks, and we'll get to, one is, what do AFL Fantasy and Dream Team do with how they price them? Do they price them at the times 1.25 of the average, which is that minus percentage? Or then the other part is SuperCoach. Man, Max Gawn, Lockie Neal, like these guys are 10, 15, 20 points averaged higher than what they've ever done. How are you going to be able to afford all of these guys heading into 2021, Kane?
Well, I have been doing a little bit of research into this space for some future CP type of content, but I'll reveal some of the numbers I've found, because I've found it to be fascinating. If we're talking about 120 plus averaging players, last year we had 4 guys average
in
120
SuperCoach
plus. In SuperCoach, year before we had 4 guys 120 plus.
Yeah.
Before that we had 2. Year before that we had 1. Year before that we had 3. So around 3 typically seems to be, you know, where we sort of get to. Currently, at this point in time, we have 9 guys averaging 120 plus. Again, one of those is Jeremy Howe. We have 8 guys that we take him out going 120 plus over that stretch. And there is some elite players in this stretch. This is peak Dangerfield. Wow. This is Dusty at his absolute best. This is when Goldstein was the number 1 player in the comp. We never got more than 4.
Yeah.
So to have 8 currently at this point in the season tells you something about the way that scoring's going in that format, the way points are getting allocated to the big dogs. And even if we jump down to the 110 bracket, last year we had 13 players go 110. Year before that we had 10, 11, 16. So that's about, you know, that sort of range. Currently, we've got 20 guys averaging 110 plus.
It's double the
so
best.
So clearly we're going to have to adjust. Again, there's been some talk about going back to full 20-minute quarters. There's been some talk of keeping it at 16, splitting the difference with 18. But whatever happens, especially in that game of SuperCoach where we know it's a consistent 3,300 point pie every week, we've seen that the big dogs have taken a bigger portion of that pie. Again, Patrick Dangerfield, his record year, and we know how dominant he was in those years, was 134. Yeah. We've got Max Gawn and Lockie Neal in the 140 range.
Yeah, it's nuts.
So I think, as Ridge said, how are you going to manage the salary cap? Because it will be the same, because the total points are unchanged. Like, to think that you can afford multiple of those guys, you're absolutely kidding yourself.
It's true.
And I'm going to throw something else there as well, MJ.
Oh, no.
Don't forget, Todd Goldstein has had 2 disappointing games, one after the other. So he would have been in that 120 average category.
Yeah, true.
And Josh Kelly has had an interrupted game in that.
Yeah.
So he would have been likely to be pushing up into that as well.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh my goodness gracious me, you know? So how can you afford to start someone averaging 140 to 150 points? If they have a couple of big rounds, they're going close to 150. You can't do it.
It's getting to that point, and we'll spend a lot more time, you know, over the months of November, December, January. Our Patreons, we'll get some early and some exclusive extra content we'll get to you, and we'll spend a lot of time next year. But how we structure our sides into 2021 it's going to be really, really difficult to have multiple of these big week in, week out captaincy option style of guys without blowing the bank. And then I think the compounded issue on that is the fact that this year in 2020, most teams have used more first-year players or debutants than they probably ideally would have, given to these condensed fixtures. So the problem's even further enhanced because now you've possibly got less options to select from.
So, MJ, the funniest thing about this is at the start of the season, if we were going to be preemptive and try and predict which cash cow was going to hit the mark, the one guy in the top 2 or 3 options in Will Gould would have been high on our lists and yet hasn't featured at once.
Yeah, that's true. I suppose that's one positive for us, isn't it? That we haven't seen Gould.
Yeah, just wait till Horse, though. He'll no doubt debut him in the next week.
It'll be round 18
for 2021.
It'll be something that we do. There will be an article to land at coachespanel.tv very, very early in the 2021 preseason or very, very late in the 2020 year, depending on how you want to choose to view it, where we'll make sure we look at who are the potential cash cows that have already been on the AFL list, that will be basement price for us next year, that didn't get a game this year. Gould is certainly one of those guys.
And McGuinness as well, MJ,
Yeah,
albeit he's probably going to get a game in the next few weeks now with the way the Hawks are tracking, unfortunately.
Yeah, we know, and there'll be some really good kids that get picked up in the draft with North Melbourne, Adelaide, Hawthorn, all being teams that are needing to rejuvenate and having relatively high draft selections.
Brody Kemp as well, MJ, will be healthy for the Blues.
Yeah.
Again, he's more of a key position guy, but, after an ACL,
there's always someone, isn't there? There's
always someone that emerges.
There'll be a mature age guy.
I think the other thing in the AFL and the Dream Team formats will be a lot of people will be pretty much underpriced anyway going off this season.
Well, it'll be interesting. We know SuperCoach with the limited or the definitive number of points available on the field, their pricing is fairly predictable. How AFL Fantasy and Dream Team price, do they do it with the mathematical fantasy booking of let's add a percentage allocation to what it might have been? Or do they just go, look, let's just price them at what they are and maybe not offer a discount to an injured player across the board. Let's maybe not offer a discount for missing a certain amount of games. Like they've got options available. Their hands aren't tied, but it is going to be interesting to see what they do.
I think just because we're all on the same even platform to start with, we're just going to have to adjust, aren't we? No matter what the decision, the outcome is, and it's all going to be different from format to format.
Of course.
We're just going to have to adjust, and we're all on the same page, and we just got to move forward. So there's going to be a chance here where there's a guy that we consider burnt us this year is actually going to be a very feasible starting guy next year.
There's a few of those around there, isn't there?
There's a few, MJ, yes. I think Patrick Cripps, for one, especially in SuperCoach, we spoke about how all the best players this season have really just absorbed other people's points in their own team and taken their average to new levels. This is a guy in Patrick Cripps that's gone the other way. And we did flag in another podcast about, what would future Carlton look like? He's carried such a weight of the team for such a long time.
Yeah.
And they definitely, I think, in my mind, have improved.
Yes.
They've definitely improved under David Teague. Are they a top 8 team yet? No. But they're definitely getting support from more players. I think Will Setterfield's been one of the few guys on that team that you can say has really improved. I think Wiedering as well has gone from a good player to a very good player.
Yeah.
But we've seen Patrick Cripps, his scoring's just gone completely the other way. Like, I think if he delivered his, 119 type of season this year, I'd say he's been pushing 130. That's just how good he was in years past. But, he's around 100, which when you compare him and you said you're going to get Patrick Cripps averaging 40 points less than a Lachie Neale, and we're talking about a situation where we're strapped for cash. Again, I think he's a guy that as we build through the preseason, he's going to be a hugely popular name.
Yeah, I think there's a heap.
I think it's going to really raise that question, isn't it? I'm getting used to having this, MJ, where I'm talking over the top of people already talking, which I do at the best of times. But the thing is, I wonder if there is that question around just how bad is he carrying an injury at this point in time, and is he likely to be rested in the next couple of rounds? Like, Carlton's no longer a real option for finals football this year. What are they benefiting out of playing the guy if he's really, really sore?
Well, Carlton, as you say, they're 4 points out of that first bunch that are pushing for the top four, and that is predominantly led by Melbourne and the Western Bulldogs. Then there's another 4 points beyond that gap to be GWS and St Kilda. And then there's a bit more of a jump to Collingwood. And then there's the really big jump to those top five secure sides. And they're going to be the ones that make up the top four in whatever order it chooses to be. A loss this week for Carlton, which wouldn't shock me at all to Sydney, given how well they played this week. That year is done for finals. And we talked about Gawn. Cripps is another one of those players that could just go, look, we've had a great crack, but no, that's his year done. It's going to be an interesting one. That is for sure.
Yeah, I think the other ones, MJ, that jump out to me is they were so good for us last year. Josh Dunkley.
Yep.
Tim Taranto, especially in the
Yes.
Dream Team format. Taranto is definitely a guy that we know sort of bats. Whatever his DT is typically what his SuperCoach is. You know,
Yeah.
Dunkley last year showed that when he was red hot, he was red hot across both and was, 120 plus DT, 130 in SuperCoach. But those guys have been super undervalued. We know Josh Dunkley's playing this hybrid ruck rover, ruck roll. The engine room of the Dogs is loaded.
Yeah.
It's also completely random to the outside every single week. Josh Dunkley, we know against the Cats, he was about as red hot as a player's been this year in the first quarter. And then all of a sudden he's rucking more, a bit more on the outside. Ball doesn't roll his way. And he looks like a shell of himself. And Taranto, we know the Giants again are loaded, but he had that shoulder injury as well.
And
That really limited him. But these are two guys that he did too. And that's the mix that they're trying to juggle with all their stars, is that honestly, they're probably all best as inside bulls. But Taranto is a guy like Cornelio, like Green, that have dual flexibility because they can go forward and kick a goal. And Dunkley and Taranto, they were guys that I think most people had locked in for being top 8 mids, especially in Dream Team. So to get them off the back of underwhelming seasons, especially when they both can be explained away, we know Dunkley, syndesmosis isn't an injury you can come back from. It takes a long time to get back to full health. And Andrew McGrath is going through that right now, albeit he's got a full preseason to recover. But I think those are two guys that when there's people that are in their age bracket and show that type of potential, if you get them at any type of discount, you've always got to be looking at them.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
And Kane and I were talking about this in the group chat earlier. There's really bad luck at the moment. We've been caught on the bench. Guys are finding themselves on the bench 10, 15 minutes in a quarter.
Yeah, it's true. All it takes.
And that's the thing, isn't it, MJ? It swings the score so massively. As you said, if you watch a game, and we know as fantasy coaches how closely we watch our players, and you realise for a while the ball's been on the far side of the ground, especially at the Gabba. It's always really interesting because the boundary side for the cameras is on the one side, but the actual interchange's on the far side. So you can actually see who's standing on the bench waiting to come on. And there's nothing more frustrating when you realise they've played out the boundary side. They haven't gone to the interchange side for 10 minutes. And a Lockie Neal's on the bench. Or one of your players that you're waiting for the scores to tick over. And it's just the nature of play. And in these reduced quarters, a lot of the time it's not worth, they just say, there's only a minute left in the quarter. We'll save the interchange for the next one. And you've had a period of 12, 15 minutes where no points are ticking over at all. And you get these big swings in score for sure.
Yeah, it's very, very true. We got some Patreon questions we want to get to before we wrap up the episode. But Rids, a quick one from me. For coaches that are playing an overall rankings game, regardless of the format right now, coaches, panel fans and followers will be very... in the Dream Team format, will have seen a familiar name at the top of the rankings charts for the last couple of weeks. You find yourself hundreds of points clear at this stage of the season as the number one leader. The question so much isn't obviously around that. It's sort of well done on a great year, mate. But if you were to chase someone that is in the lead, how hard do you need to go right now? If you are going for rankings and going for the highest possible ranking, as someone that's sitting in the leader's chair, what's the mindset that you're likely to have? And what should I, as a potentially chasing coach, be looking to do?
Okay, so from my perspective at the moment, I'm just trying to play the percentages right.
Okay.
So I am not taking risky moves. I'm letting other people take the risks at this point in time.
Yeah.
To a degree, yes. So if I'm chasing someone, and again, you know this, I've been chasing for years now.
Yeah.
I feel like I've been chasing for 20-something years. So it's nice to be in the other shoe for a change. But if you're in the other shoe and you're chasing, that's where you've got to get really tricky. As soon as a Lockie Neal gets to a bye round with 4 rounds to go afterwards, you take the risk. You've got to trade him to something else that has a friendly matchup, bank a few points. Max Gorn's perfect for this.
Yeah.
Like you might get McGoldstein, who was absolutely putrid in the last 2 games before the bye round, and you might have a few extra coin. You might look at moving a Goldstein to a Gorn.
Yeah.
But again, you are doing things at high risk.
Yeah.
I think me and you said this for the better part of the last decade.
Yeah.
100 points a week is pretty much maximum to make up, to chase over the course of a normal season. So what does that mean now? Well, is it 80? Is it 120? Who would know? But time will tell. But the reality is it's a bloody hard to catch those points up, later in the season. You've got limited trade, you've got this, you've got that, you've got
buy rounds, Rids, as well. Now you've taken away 4 less variables, when you're chasing in your favour.
Yeah, you don't have 22 players.
And especially with a rolling lockout, for someone like in Rids' position, he's got 2 chances every week to make sure he doesn't have a captain that's knocked out. Because really, if you're chasing, that's the type of wild swing. You need Rids to put a Lockie Neal as a captain. He gets knocked out on 2, and your captain goes like when you've got that vice captain and he can see an 80+ score this year in DT.
Yeah,
what are you going to catch him up 30 points if you nail it? Again, if you take him on and you get at Whitfield last night, now you're 30 points again. And I think there are sometimes, especially in that final round, last year, the guy that jumps to mind that won people leagues was Jeremy Cameron. Yeah. We knew he was chasing the Coleman medal. It was a super juicy matchup. Yeah. And he kicked 10 goals in that final round. We've seen way back Nick Rewalt.
Yeah, that
those
200.
Key forwards that have this super volatility. Maybe this year it's a Tom Lynch or a Jack Rewalt in a SuperCoach format.
Yeah,
got
against
the Crows.
Yeah.
Maybe they fill their boots and have an absolutely huge score, but it's not easy to do, especially at this point of the season. Again, as Rich said, trades are really restricted this year, especially in a DT format. So, are you really going to be pushing it this week to try to catch up only to have no trades left? It's a really tricky one, and it's easy to overplay your hand and just put yourself in a worse position.
It's certainly.
And the other thing that's relevant, is DT only gave you 3 additional trades after the bye rounds were known.
And you were shallow probably on trades anyway.
You were already shallow. It was a luck factor to get to the buys with the right players to try and minimise the damage through the buys.
Yep.
And as we're seeing this week, round 15 is an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, for DT it's been difficult.
Well, we're only looking at 1,500 scores. And the reality is, trying to catch 100 points in that week.
Yeah, you can't.
It's impossible. You have to get really, really, really lucky.
Yeah, and a lot of the premiums this week haven't popped though. So yeah.
Having said that though, it's really, really weird because I look at SuperCoach and I look at DreamTeam, and they're giving you the option to use 3 trades a week through the buys to counter that risk, but they're only giving you 3 extra trades to actually do it. So it's almost impossible to chase, and you've got to get, it's got to be a 1 in 100 shot to a degree to actually land the correct guy at that point in time that doesn't have the extra time on the bench through the quarter, that doesn't get managed through the games, that has something to play for, and he doesn't get a knock from week to week. It's impossible to do. You know what I mean?
It's very, very tricky to do. If you find yourself in a leading position in any of the formats, it's certainly tighter up at the top of AFL Fantasy and SuperCoach. I think there's only like 100 points within the top 10 in SuperCoach at the moment. So in some of the formats, it's a little tighter. AFL Fantasy's got its own unique challenges, Kane, where if you're a leader in that format, again, rolling lockouts, 3 trades every single week. And it's always been harder to make up ground in that format more than others before because of the variables of how many trades in Dream Team and SuperCoach a coach could have burned through. 3 trades a week in AFL Fantasy. If you've got if you're in the top couple of dozen, your team's pretty much done in terms of premiums. Now all you're doing is you're just playing the fixture matchup games week in and week out. And
especially you're just avoiding those heavy taggers.
Yeah.
You're just avoiding all those heavy taggers.
It's tough to chase.
As I said, you're trying to avoid those. Sometimes it's a lot easier to avoid the stinker because you know they're playing De Boer or you know maybe an Ed Kerno.
Yeah.
Than actually pluck out these massive scores, if that makes sense.
True.
Because, again, Warple was the type of guy this week that everyone thought, get on Warple against the Crows.
Yeah.
He had some good form. But it actually didn't eventuate. Same as Tim Taranto. It looked like everything was pointing his way against the Blues, that he was turning his form around. Wasn't to be.
Yeah.
Whereas Patrick Cripps was going to have a hard day. That's going to be a hard day if you've got Matty De Boer.
Yeah.
De Boer wasn't going anywhere else. He was only going to Patrick Cripps. So I think in that format, yes, that's where you really can take the fixture, move out the guys that are, heavy tag players, especially even the key forwards. If you've got a matchup against Harris Andrews, even a Jacob Wiedering, we saw what they did. It's not going to end too well. There's not too many of the defensive forwards running around. Again, Jake Lloyd just quietly reeled off his 13th SuperCoach ton in a row.
Yeah, no one else has done that this year.
No one's done that, and that's 13 straight, obviously, since the restart as well. So, funnily enough, Lloyd's 1 sub-ton is against the Crows of all teams.
Oh, gosh, who would have thought that?
It's such a hard year to chase, MJ, and I feel like at this point of the season, a lot of people do turn to leagues because, in all honesty, the ranking is really hard to change, and a lot of people, as that goal of winning the competition falls further and further away, people do shift to league. But just on a side note is how impressive have the draftees been this year? We thought we had a great crop last year.
Phenomenal. Great crop.
If you're in a keeper league, I would not be trading away your first pick unless you really think it's going to help you win, because we've had 6 to 7 guys off the top of my head that have been plug and play quality on-field scorers
every week nearly
in their first season.
Yeah.
Again, Tavarau, Sarong, Will Day, Hayden Young in the few games he got before he had a syndesmosis.
Yeah.
Like, hey, if you can get the right one in a keeper league, you can rebuild quicker than you can ever rebuild before.
It's true. Look, historically, keeper leagues, in terms of the redrafting of and the draftees, the first 5 to maybe 6 or 7 of the first round, have some high value, and then you're starting to look to the recycled players and the redraft players. Maybe not as much, that is for sure.
So, MJ, just a last final point on what we were just talking about before, and I don't want to harp on this because it's not important or anything, but the reality is sometimes you're just all out of luck.
Yep.
You make the right trade, you bring in a Josh Kelly, he absolutely smashes it, then a big clumsy ruckman comes and knees him in the head and knocks him out for the rest of the game just after half time. Sometimes you're just all out of luck. Your luck's a massive, massive factor now.
It's true. Look,
that's a good point, Rids.
It takes skill to get into
and you can't let it discourage yourself. You have to, like you said, the logic of that trade. A lot of people did a round 15 player that wasn't going to be available this week to help their numbers. Yeah. They bring on a Josh Kelly, and what happens? They have to trade Josh Kelly back out just to get back to the 18 players they were trying to get to for this round. And it is easy to be discouraged, and I feel like every year we say this at this time, but you have to find the fun. If you just love watching a player and you want to own them for 3 weeks, who cares if it's not even the perfect move? If it means you have to burn your other trades to get them in just for the fun of it. Like, don't even worry about it. Like, it's just a game we play. We all take it way too seriously at times. It all makes us really, really angry at times. But
and Kane, as a Chris owner, how many times have we spoken about this? Where he's as blonde and peroxided as you could possibly see. He They try to kick it to him, and they miss him by 15 metres. He drops a simple mark. We all do it. We all get frustrated as they don't use them when they're by. You yell at the TV. You go, what's going on here? At the end of the day, just to try and enjoy it, you know?
Yeah, and again, the reason we do play at the end of the day is when the dust settles and we start building back up for this 2021 season, we love the discussion. Again, we don't, especially on the coach panel, we're not about, trumpeting rank, good or bad. Yeah. It's actually, the discussion is for me, easily the most fascinating part, the strategy. And the Josh Kelly one's a great example because everything about that move was right. The only thing that was wrong, unfortunately, as Rid said, was Shane Mumford's knee into Josh Kelly's head and the score that came from it. But you just got to back it in, and eventually you'll have a season where luck does roll your way. And maybe you'll have a finish overall rank-wise that you're super, super proud of. And that's really cool. But again, there's still fun to be had even just in the learnings of that every single year.
It's very, very true. Last couple of questions we want to get to from just a couple of our Patreons. Johnny Coombs, just having a good year in SuperCoach too, by the way. Well done to you, Johnny. Asked a question that we've kind of already answered regarding trade targets of Crouch and O'Brien. So we'll pivot away from that one because I felt like we answered that around about half an hour ago. Kyle Brett wants to know, I'll throw it over to you, Kane. Which of the Bulldog mids would you want to finish the year with in AFL Fantasy?
Oh, I just have to take McRae. I just think that, again, Bontempelli had the one massive game against the Crows and he's been pretty solid otherwise. But if cash isn't an issue, I'm taking McRae. Second is Hunter. Again, Hunter is just made for this format. His role is never a concern. He's got a pure wingman and he's just having a great year, to be honest. We know that he was trying to make amends after he lost the vice captaincy and he's just having an absolute blinder. It is a 115 type of season in years past, and he's got a good ceiling. I'd probably put, just to round it out, Bontempelli third and then Dunkley fourth, just because of this volatility and role. It's just, I just don't like it, MJ.
No, well, if he picks up ruck mid status for us next year, maybe we'll like it. But at the moment, not a huge.
We've got good enough rucks, MJ. We've got Gorn, Grundy. Are we really going to pick Josh Kelly?
We need him to be forward. That's
right. We want him to be a forward.
Forward. Let's get on the Taranto picking up DPP train. That's exactly where we'd love him to be in 2021. Rid's last question from Andy Griff. He wants to know in SuperCoach. A couple of weeks ago, he jumped on Big Boy McAvoy at 424K, had that big 140 scorer, and then, he didn't have a great week over the past week or two. Does he hold him for this matchup against St Kilda, or does he look to spend some money and go and get Max Gorn? He's got 5 trades and 100K in the bank. Does he do it, or does he maybe look to try to fix up an F6 problem?
Okay, the reality of this situation is John Segler has been absolutely awful rucking. So it looks like Ben McAvoy, he's got the big scores when he plays behind the ball or when he's got a full ruck role. So my thing here is I just think there's enough uncertainty around his role where you just pull the pin and you just grab Gorn now.
Right.
Yeah, I agree as well on that. I think if you look at that McAvoy score as well, MJ, he was intercepting everything early, contested marks, intercept marks, all this sort of stuff. And that, it was a 70-point, individual quarter. That's why he was scoring so much. So as Rid said, it's not even that rucking is so much helping him. It's just that when he's on and it's coming in, he's having, these great scoring patches. St Kilda's got a pretty handy forward line though. Who does he take? Does he take Max King? Rowan Marshall and Paddy Ryder are going to switch off down there. Yeah. I don't see it as a great matchup where, the ball's bombed in. I just don't see McAvoy feasting, in the air like that. They're pretty competent in the air, and St Kilda love, using their pace, Richmond style and counter-attacking. And I just don't see them blazing away. So if you have a chance to get Gorn, especially from a player like Big Boy, I wouldn't even care who my F6 was. I just think that you're going to make up so much points on that move alone.
So true, man. Yeah, it's really true. And let's be honest, there's some decent enough cows that can do okay. Maybe you've got a Riccardi. Maybe you've got a Buderick that can float you anywhere.
And also, MJ, you're in a best 18 anyway, so does it even matter? You want the ceiling.
Totally. Yeah, ceiling counts next week in SuperCoach. That's very, very true. Hey, lads, I appreciate your thoughts. I know round 15 is just hours away from finishing. Then we've got about 24 hours. It's actually about 20 between lockout lifting and lockout reclamping down. For those of you in AFL Fantasy, your Tigers and your Magpies, they will be locked at the commencement of the round. And if they've played in this round, round 15, you will be awarded their scores and the subsequent cash impacts based off their break-evens. While for Dream Team and SuperCoach, those players will be left available for you to trade, to move, to captain, to emergency, to loophole, to do whatever your heart desires up until the final game of round 16, and then they will be locked. And any players that they've been linked to get loopholes or emergencies, then those will commence. We certainly hope for you that round 15 has been kind and that round 16 is even better for you. Rids, as always, a pleasure, mate. Nice to have you on. And I hope you have a great last 3 weeks, not just in Dream Team, but in all the formats, mate.
Hey, just a quick one as well. I just want to shout out to Fox.
Oh, yes.
Fox is having an absolute personal best year. So massive
best year for anyone. It's one of the greatest seasons you can have. He's just flying across the board.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, exactly. He's just unfortunate he's run into myself at this point in time this year. Sorry.
Try to enjoy it. I know it's hard, but try to enjoy it for you as well as Fox.
Absolutely smashing it out of the park, Fox.
Yeah, look, if we were given an award for someone dominating 3 formats, he's the one that's going to get it. That is for sure. He's been brilliant. As of your work yet again on this episode, Kane, thank you very much.
No worries, MJ. Thank you.
If you want to go and check out this episode back again, because why not? Or any of the other episodes we've done, you can check it out via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the Google Podcasts. You can go and check it out through there. We'll still keep dropping articles for you at coachespanel.tv right throughout random periods of the round. And if you're loving the work from the Coaches Panel in 2020, and looking forward to what you might get during the trade and draft period, let alone for 2021, there's exclusive content landing for you. All you can do if you want to join our Patreon army, there is a tier that is right for you. All the links for that are at coachespanel.tv. Hope your week's going well, and we look forward to chatting to you again very, very soon.